Hello and welcome. In the previous video, I looked at the Godot game engine and just checking out the website, looking at a little bit about the documentation and downloading the engine. I ended off with opening up the project manager and starting a blank project. In this next video, I want to cover a little bit about the interface of the Godot editor. So there's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of panels, there's a lot of stuff to look at, and there's a lot of buttons to click. It can be really confusing and really overwhelming at first, but if you can understand what each panel does and how it interacts with your whole entire game, then it makes it a little bit easier to navigate the space. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And so you should be looking at my Godot editor now. Right here, this is exactly where I left off in the previous video. I have a blank project, and we're looking at in the dead center, this is called our viewport. If you've worked in any other game engines or really any other kind of digital software before, like Photoshop or Illustrator, Premiere Pro, any of the Adobe suites, if you worked in Krita making 2D art, if you've worked in 3ds Max making 3D art, if you've done any other kind of previous gameplay or game development work, either in GDevelop, Stencil, or Scratch, some of these panels might look pretty familiar. But again, this is the viewport. This is where our action is happening. And this shows our current scene selected. So you can see the tab up here. This relates to whatever scene we currently have selected. Right now, it's empty. I don't have a scene selected. There's nothing in my game yet. If we look at the main menu bar, which is this kind of top section up here, it runs the very kind of like width of the screen. So top left of this main menu bar, we have our main menu. This is where we can see our scene, and we'll have several drop downs. We have our project. We can access project settings. We can deal with version control. We have a debug option, so we can start debugging from a console or have like debug notes, editor settings, and help settings. These are pretty standard for any kind of digital software. And if you've worked in anything on a computer before, this might feel familiar. In the center of this main bar, we have a couple different options for switching between workspaces. So workspaces are just our how our viewport works. So if I click 2D, you'll see that my viewport below changes. And if you have a keen eye, you'll see that the lines up here, the items up here in my toolbar, changes between my 2D and 3D workspace. So there are some subtle differences here. A lot of these initial tools on the far left are going to be universal. Some of these 2D and 3D tools specific will be kind of more on this right side here. We also have a script tab, and this is what we'll be using to write code in our games. I'm not going to really cover this in depth in this video, but this is where we'll be adding scripts. Now, again, we'll be using predominantly GD script, but if you're interested in C# or C++ or JavaScript, there are little plugins that you can add or extensions you can add to your project that allow you to code in those languages. But again, for the sake of these tutorials, I'll be using GD script. Not only is it default in Godot, it's also really tight and streamlined, and it's also really lightweight and easy. And the language syntax is pretty simple, even if you're a beginning developer or don't have any coding experience. And then finally, we have the asset library. This looks pretty similar to the uh, uh, the project manager panel, that when you first open up Godot before you open up a project, it's going to be the same thing. So this is where you're going to be pulling assets from the Godot library. You can also access this online. I really honestly don't use this very much in the editor. So I'm going to go back to my 2D panel up here in my main menu. And again, I'm looking at my viewport now. Another thing to keep in mind that as my mouse moves around the space, and if I start clicking into certain panels, so if I click over here in this top left section, well, if I click over here in this bottom right, bottom left section, you'll see that now I have this light blue bar that highlights whatever section I'm in or whatever workspace or screen space that I'm in. Whenever I move from this file system panel to my viewport, you'll see that my viewport now gets this light blue highlight around it. And if I go over to my inspector or my nodes or anything like that, it will change as well. So the next thing I want to show you is my scene dock. So I was just over here, this section right here in the top left. You'll see this little panel. It has a tab that says scene on it. And this will be open by default. This is where you're going to be creating your scenes. Now, scenes in Godot are a little bit different than scenes in other games. Think of a scene as any visual element that your player will see. A scene can be a player, a scene can be an enemy, a scene can be a level, a scene can be a collectible object that the player picks up, or a scene can be a light or a particle effect. This is going to be one of the core concepts of Godot, and I'm going to cover it in a following video. But this scene panel here, or the scene dock, is where we're going to be adding or creating scenes, and it will show us the current scene we have selected and the preferred window mode, whether 2D, 3D, or script, um, that we have for this scene. Now, I can tell what scene I'm in specifically by looking at this tab at the top of my viewport. Right now it's empty because, again, I don't have a scene in here. Scenes can be 2D, they can be 3D, and they can be user interface or control nodes as well. And they are called nodes. So nodes and scenes are kind of the building blocks of Godot. And again, I'm going to cover those in another video. But just know that this panel right here, or this dock, is going to be our scene dock. And this is where you can create new scenes. You can add a node, add a script, or add a scene or node to an additional scene. Okay, next. Going to the bottom left, and I kind of touched on this just a second ago, this is going to be our file system dock. And this is where you're going to be viewing your project files. You can also drag and drop files to here. Now, by default, there's going to be one item that's in here, and it is an icon. It is the Godot icon. So if I hover over this, I can see icon.svg. I can see the size, I can see the type. It's a compressed texture 2D, and I can see the size of this, which is, well, the dimensions of this, so the X and Y value. So this is 128 by 128 pixels. This is going to be default in every single project that you open. This icon is going to be in there. And it's going to be in your res folder. And this folder just represents your file location and your project itself. Anything that you add in here will be saved. And whenever you save your project, all of your files and assets that you are creating or using will be stored here. So I can drag and drop images in here. I can make subfolders. And that's one thing I'll talk about in another video, but organization is key for this. Next, we have an inspector. Now, this is going to be over here to the far right side. And again, because I don't have anything selected right now, I don't have anything in my scene, I don't have anything in my game, there's nothing to really look at in my inspector. But this allows you to edit the properties of the currently selected node or scene that you are in. So if I'm working in my game and I select my background, I'll be able to see my background properties here. Those might be transform properties, those might be positional properties. I might be able to change my rotation. I can change other values. Now, depending on what kind of scene I have selected, and what nodes are attached to it, I will have different properties that I can edit and adjust. This happens when I also add a script to a scene or an object. When I add a script to a scene or a node, then I can view that script and whatever kind of public properties are available for it to adjust. So if I declare a speed variable or a acceleration variable or a weight variable, I can edit those in my property panel of my inspector. And then finally, we have this little bottom bar here, right at the bottom part of our viewport. And there are a few different options in here by default. We have output, we have a debugger console, we have audio, animation, and a shader editor. So if I click on any one of these, you'll see that I then have little pop-up panels that show up here. And if I click on whatever is open, it will kind of toggle it back down. Now our output will send out any messages, any text that we get while we're playtesting or running our game. Our debugger is where we can help kind of isolate and define where errors are happening. Our audio is an audio mixer. We can add effects, we can edit audio, when we can change things within the engine. Same thing with our animation panel. We can edit, we can create, we can alter animations. And our shader editor also, we can play around with that and edit our shaders in Godot. So that is kind of, shaders just impact how items are visually seen. And those are going to be the kind of like major portions and major sections of our Godot interface. So there's a lot of things moving. There's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of components. There's a lot of docks and menus and panels. But just taking it one thing at a time will give you a little bit more clarity on how things work. And that kind of covers it. So for our interface, again, I'll be covering a lot more of the nuts and bolts in later videos, but hopefully this is enough to help you get started and understanding what buttons to click on and how to click on them. As always, have fun, get in here, start playing around, start pressing buttons, start breaking things, make a new project, and just go crazy. And if you have questions, please reach out.